All right, I think we've got a good number of folks already in the audience, so let's do this thing, right? All right, hello, folks, and welcome back to the Bug Bash. We are excited to have you all join us for another live episode in this series where we tackle real-world test automation problems or challenges, and we do that by talking to the folks in the industry who live and breathe this stuff every single day. I am your host, Jenna Beckett, and I am stoked to be here talking with you all again today. And whether you are joining us live or catching the replay, you are in the right place if you want to learn more about cy.origin and changes that are impacting this command in Cypress version 14. Now, before we dive into all of the good stuff about cy.origin, I do just want to take a pause here at the beginning and recognize BK in our Discord server. You are this week's Bug Bash swag winner. We're going to be sending BK a little swag package, and you could score yourself one. And you do that one of two ways. So one, join this live series episode after episode, or two, if you're not able to join the live sessions, you can always drop us a future topic suggestion in the community discussion thread right here in the Discord server. Now it is time to find out what in the world is going on in the world of Cypress, and we're going to do that by taking a tour around a couple of new features. So we're going to start with Cypress Studio, and to begin with, have you checked out Cypress Studio? Like lately, or I guess just ever as well. Because if you haven't, right now is a really good time to dive in. So first and foremost, you can enable this in your Cypress local runner using your Cypress config file. It actually allows you to navigate through the application under test and records interactions that you're making. And now, to the new feature part, you're actually able to right-click on elements and generate assertions for those elements. So if you have never used Cypress Studio and you're looking for a good starting point, hold up just a second. I've got a resource that I'll share in a moment that is a great place for you to learn about it, see the new features in action, and kick off your journey there. Coming up next, we are talking about Webpack. And we're talking about Webpack because Webpack got a little bit of an upgrade in Cypress 14.4, our latest minor version. So I'm going to try and get through this. No tongue twisters. Here we go. Both Webpack Dev Server and Webpack Batteries Included Preprocessor now ship with Webpack Bundle Analyzer. Whoa, that was a mouthful. Like, yay me for getting through it. Not yay me for doing this on camera twice now. I'll stop that. But the point of what I'm trying to make here, this Webpack Bundle Analyzer, it is a great diagnostic tool to determine bundle statistics. So if you have not seen this yet, 14.4, it comes already packaged with Cypress. Now we are coming up on what is upcoming, bum. And my first question for you is, are you going to Front-End Nation? Because I'm going to Front-End Nation because I don't want to miss a talk by Cypress founder Brian Mann talking about test automation with natural language. Check out his talk on the first day of the conference, June 3rd. He is on the schedule at 11:45 a.m. Eastern Time. So check that out. And if you are not able to join the conference for the main conference days, you can find yours truly delivering a Cypress workshop a couple weeks after the conference on June 17th. Now, on to my favorite part where I get to talk about amazing resources coming to you from the Cypress community. We're talking blogs, we're talking plugins, we're talking other resources, things that I just could not help but share. And for those attending live, go ahead and look over in the chat. We will be dropping those links as we talk about it. If you are catching the replay, just look down in the description and you'll find all the links there. Starting off strong with a new lightweight plugin for anyone doing API testing and using Zod schema validators. We have a new plugin that was created by Sebastian Clavijo Suero. Sebastian, let me know how I did on the pronunciation this time. I can't wait to personally try this out. It seems like a great addition to your test automation toolkit. So check out the GitHub repo. We're dropping it in chat now. I did mention earlier that I have a resource for you if you have never used Cypress Studio before. So check out the link to the Learn with RV YouTube channel. We're dropping that in chat now. And the latest video on that channel has a full walkthrough of Cypress Studio featuring those assertion features I mentioned. So go give that a watch. And then my last resource that I couldn't help but share, it's actually a little bit older, but again, I just think this is a really valuable resource, especially if you're someone who is getting started with the test suite, if you're looking to start a new product, add test automation to it, or just redesign your existing test suite. This is a really good video to watch. It is actually an episode of Never Code Alone, and it features Gilberto, aka the Mexi tester, who was one of my favorite Cypress Conf 2024 speakers. And in this video, what he's going through is just a bunch of different design patterns. They do it in a live coding format, so it's really engaging, super easy to learn from. All right, I think that's it. Now time for the topic of today's episode, and I think why you all are here. So if you are testing modern web applications, you have likely run into the need to interact across multiple domains, especially if your app has integrations with, third parties like Auth0 or something like that. To perform these types of test workflows in Cypress, you have to have cy.origin. But implementing cy.origin in your test suite is not always a straightforward path. So in today's episode, what we are going to be doing is demystifying this essential command. We're going to talk best practices. We're going to talk migrating to Cypress version 14 and how that impacts cy.origin's usage. But before we jump into the nuances, I know, another but last one, I promise. We need to introduce our amazing guest for today's episode, and that is Cacie Prins. Cacie is a senior engineer focusing on the Cypress app and my personal go-to for any Cypress related questions. So if you are looking for someone who is bridging the gap between UX and robust code architecture, and you're looking for someone who has the ability to break down complex subjects into little bite-sized pieces, Cacie is the person for you, and that is why they are the perfect guest for today's episode. So give me a moment. I am going to find Cacie in our chat and audience here, and I'm going to bring him up on stage. All right, Cacie, I got you that invite. You want to come up on stage with me?
Here I am. Hi. Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Cacie, I'm so excited. You know how excited I am to have you on today's episode. But if you wouldn't mind, just so everybody can get to know you, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, so my name is Cacie Prins. I've been here at Cypress for a little over 2 years now. I'm mainly working on the app here. Everything from how our command line interface is outputting messages to how we're uploading artifacts from your CI integrations and things like that, all the way to a big thing I worked on for Cypress 14, which is some changes in how you have to use Cypress Origin because of some deprecations in browser land. And if you'll bear with me, give me 1 second, I will be right back.
Yeah, no worries, Cacie. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I believe that Cacie is going to add some really awesome context for you all in understanding cy.origin. So I think the best way for us to get started, Cacie, is really just kind of diving into what cy.origin is, how it works. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
All right. So, if you are familiar with the Cypress open mode, you know that we've got the command log on the left side and some UI to navigate your test suite. And in an iframe, we embed your application. Now, in order to make the communication between Cypress itself in that outer pane, what we call window top, or what browsers call window top, right? In order to make that communication work, they have to be same origin, same site, right? This is a very like, it's the common security guardrails that the browser gives for us with iframes. Now, we, in order to, most of the time, when you're navigating through your application, you're going to be staying on the same domain. And that's fine. The first time you navigate in a test, we set the top URL in your browser. You can know that we set it to the same domain as the application you're testing. Now, this lets us dig directly into the DOM of your application. It lets us do some time travel. If you've noticed, like when you click on a command in your log after a test, you can see the DOM state change. Unfortunately, when you navigate to a different domain than that first domain, we kind of lose that connectivity. In Cypress 13 and below, we used an API in the browser called document.domain. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, especially for working around frame cross-origin issues when you are on the same site. Now, what browsers consider that same site to be the same foo.com, right? So if you're on docs.cypress.com, that's the same site as www.cypress.io. Not .com, excuse me. But it's a different origin. Now, if you set document.domain to be that same super domain in both the iframe and the enclosing page, you can communicate as per usual. Unfortunately, Chrome, that API is deprecating, and Chrome is taking that away from us sooner than all of the other browsers. So in Cypress 14, we changed how cy.origin works to be able to handle that situation a little bit better, which just means that you have to use Cypress or cy.origin in more contexts than you did before. cy.origin works behind the scenes by serializing that function that you pass into it as the callback, along with any arguments, and setting up a post message. If you're familiar with other ways of iframe communication, using the message API, for example, we inject a little bit of code into your application, and we hook up with post message to be able to tell the little controller code that's in your application how to query the DOM, what to look for, what to assert on, that kind of thing. So we serialize that up, we create this cross-origin bridge, and previously to Cypress 14, we would set the same super domain. This caused some issues, actually, with some auth providers that are using some newer cookie security practices, where we have to do a little bit of magic behind the scenes to make sure cookies work as you expect them as well. And that little bit of magic didn't work as well with some of the providers that are using more modern cookie security practices. I think the big one there is Microsoft's Azure. They're doing partition cookies, and it doesn't work quite right. So previously, we had this experimental field called the experimental skip domain injection that you could tell Cypress when using cy.origin to skip injecting document domains so that those kinds of cookie flows would work. We took that out in Cypress 14 because you've got to use cy.origin in those contexts now. And that's basically anytime you visit one origin, that is, the HTTP or HTTPS has to match, and the same domain, so the fully qualified domain, that all has to match. If it doesn't, then you've got to use cy.origin to interact with that page after you've navigated to it from a different page. And this is separate from your base URL that you set up. Let's see.
Awesome. Thanks, Cacie. That was a lot of really great information about how Cypress implements cy.origin, and just like a little bit of history behind it, especially with the context on cy 14 changes. I do want to talk to you about using cy.origin. So, are there like common ways that you see cy origin being misused or not optimized, that you could help people understand just how to implement it in a more sleek way?
Yeah, so once you understand that cy.origin is a command to Cypress to say, set up this cross-origin bridge and execute these commands within that bridge, it might start making a little bit more sense. And it's necessary in order to interact with the page, right? Like you can visit the new domain and it'll show in your iframe. But you can't assert on anything in there until you use cy.origin. Some of the ways that make it a little bit more difficult to handle in your tests are, for example, logging in with the UI of your application before every single test. That's going to be really slow. And you're going to have to deal with a lot of top loading issues, not issues, but processes, where the screen will flash for you in open mode, and we have to set top. You'll also lose a little bit of that time travel. We highly recommend when you're logging into your application, especially for tests that aren't specific to your app login flow, to use cy.session and use an API-oriented way of logging in. Most authentication providers give you a way to do the login flow with XHR requests, or just HTTP posts, rather than having to navigate to a UI and log in. That's going to be a lot faster and a lot less error prone. The other thing is, if you notice the inflection point between your domains is in the middle of a lot of your tests, like you have a flow that starts on one domain and it ends on another domain, and you're testing that entire flow over and over and over again. It makes sense because it more accurately describes your user's journey, but it makes it really difficult to handle to manage your tests. So I suggest breaking things up a little bit. Have the user flow for before the domain navigation, have the user flow for the domain navigation, where you end up using cy.origin to assert that the navigation has happened correctly. And then the third part of whatever testing you need to do on that second origin. That will help you isolate kind of the complications of cy.origin a little bit, and it should help make things a little bit more manageable. Let's see. There was another thing along with that where no, I think that's it. For that, I've also seen when you realize that we're serializing this function and the arguments that you pass in, you've got to make sure, so the first are that you pass in the objects and it gets passed into the function, right? You've got to make sure those are serializable. You can't pass in like a window reference there because we won't be able to serialize it. There's a bunch of circular references and things like that. Those have to be pretty basic values. They can be pretty hefty values, but they have to be simple and serializable. If you can put it into JSON, you can put it into there, basically. The other thing is not realizing that it doesn't work like a typical closure in JavaScript. Like you can't reference your outer variables inside that function. You've got to pass those in as arguments. And that's because that function isn't actually executed in the same context as the rest of your test commands.
Thank you, Cacie. I think that you've shared a ton of great information about cy.origin, and I think folks would really be interested in seeing how this command and maybe your recommendations work in practice. So are there a couple of examples that you could show us using cy.origin?
Yeah, give me just a second here. I've got to set my screens up a little bit. I'm going to show you. We have this repo that has some excellent examples. Um, and this is the Cypress Real World app. Um, if you can you see that on my screen?
Sure can.
You can read it okay? Great. So this is just at Cypress.io/Cypress Real World app. And within this example repo, it's just a simple baking account. It looks a little bit like Venmo. You can go and look at, we've got in the Cypress tests, we've got tests for auth providers. We have examples for Auth0, Cognito, Google, and Okta in here. Okta is the one I'm going to go with today. I know a lot more people use Auth0 and Cognito and Google, but Okta gives us the best example in here, I think, of separating the UI tests from the API programmatic tests.
Nice.
Where here, let's see. These are the actual specs, and we seed the database. That's another good practice to do, is to make sure you have a clean database state for each test. You seed the database with a known state.
Sure.
And then we use this command that we set up called login by Okta API. We pass it in username and password from the environment. That should be pretty familiar to most folks. But the magic here is what's in this command and how we define it. So in our support file, we've got the Okta commands here. And I'm going to skip over the API command and show you the UI command first. So the first thing is we're wrapping this in cy.session. Cy.session is a really important command for doing login flows. Mm-hmm. It lets you log in and then determine before each subsequent test that you call cy.session in the before each for. It ensures that you still have a valid session. And if you don't, it refreshes the session. It logs the test user back in. This is really important because you don't need to go through the login flow every time if that session is still valid. So it can vastly speed up your tests. It also provides a really useful abstraction for dividing out your login flow from the rest of your application. So the first section we see here is visiting the URL that redirects us then to our Okta domain. You can see we're passing in the username and password as the args on the second argument of cy.origin. We're taking those in that function and typing them into the Okta login form and submitting. Now, if we didn't have the cy.origin here, Cypress would actually give us an error. It would say that we expected to run this against the base URL of this application, but it was attempted to run against the Okta domain. Mm-hmm. Is that what you intended? If not, then look at using cy.origin, because cy.origin, remember, helps create that bridge. It helps Cypress communicate with an origin that isn't on the top. So we've got the login flow, and then we assert at the end of it that we've successfully logged in by looking at our UI and asserting that it contains the username that we just logged in as. The validate function is what gets called when you start your session. This validate function gets called if it fails validation, then it goes through this login flow. If it succeeds validation, then you don't need to log in. You've already got your session. You can go use your app as your test user like normal. This is, again, using the UI, which for testing the UI flow to make sure your onboarding process is good, is working as expected, the UX is working as expected, to test whether your password reset functionality is working, to test the actual login, like can a user type in their username and password to log in? But that's not the fastest way to get there. A lot of these identity providers like Okta provide an API to do this. So they've got a bunch of URLs and some IDs and some values that you've got to pass in. But we use an Okta client here. This is something that Okta publishes for folks to use, and it posts the config here, and then it gets the session token and gets the user and sets the local storage the way we all expect it to. And this is going to run a lot faster because it doesn't have to navigate. It doesn't have to open a new page. And you don't have to use cy.origin because these are all requests that are happening outside of the context of the site that you're testing. Let's see. Some other things that are helpful. Let's see. That's the main example I have for you with the auth providers here.
So you mentioned the real world app. Are there any other resources that we have that folks can go check out if they're looking for additional examples on implementing cy.origin?
Yeah, so we of course have our docs. We have our docs for cy.origin that are excellent. We've got especially like Azure examples here. We've got examples on here for most of the major identity providers. We also have a whole section here on cross-origin testing. This is really helpful for getting into the nitty-gritty of what Cypress is doing under the hood, how it's proxying traffic, how this also implicates like how cy-intercept works. It works in a very similar way where we have this proxy that proxies all the traffic. And we note some of the limitations here and some of the workarounds for external navigation and form navigation. But if there are things missing on the docs that we aren't quite aware of yet, please let us know. So we want these docs to be the most useful, the first place you look to when you've got questions about how to use a Cypress tool.
Yeah, and those can come in through GitHub. Those can come in here in Discord. We have a really awesome and active community discussion thread. So, and also a help thread as well. So a lot of places that you can go and provide that feedback. Now, Cacie, I think that, we've shared some examples of cy.origin. We've talked about Cypress 14 implications, but I think the next thing that would really be helpful and maybe that folks in the audience are looking for is I want to know how to prepare for that migration from whatever version I'm on now into Cypress version 14, and I want the minimal amount of friction that I can achieve. So are there some tips that you can give to the audience on how to just achieve a really smooth transition into the latest version?
Yeah. First of all, decide if you even need to use a cy.origin. If you don't have multiple domains, and you're not testing user workflows that cross between those domains, you probably don't even need it. The other thing is to isolate the workflows that are on the separate domains. So you can preemptively like say, oh, on this domain, I need to do a navigation to here, fill in this form, click the button, and then see this result, and then click this other thing to go to this other domain and assert that things are the way you expect them to be over there. You can split that into two. You can do the first one in one test, and then especially if you're doing practices like DB seeding or state, setting up your state with API calls before your test, because that's a really key part in getting predictive tests. You want to make sure that you have the same server state in each test run, or you're intercepting them and stubbing things out and things like that. So the big thing to do if you are navigating between subdomains a lot is to isolate those flows. Isolate your test for domain 1 over here and isolate your test for domain over here. And then when you cross over, have those as their own tests. That kind of keeps the complications of cy.origin in one place, and a lot more. It keeps it a lot easier to manage. Um, let's see. Like I said before, use your API for sessions. There are plenty of ways to do login that you don't necessarily need cy.origin for. Like I said, it is important to do the main flow, but you don't need to do the main flow before every test, especially if your identity provider offers an API. Keep the tests that are for a given domain in matching spec files, right? So don't have multiple domain. If you can get away with it, don't have multiple domains in the same spec file. Usually they're going to be different user flows in your application that are on different domains anyways. So you likely only have a few different inflection points where users need to be switching between those domains. You can test those in isolation. It's a little bit more like a unit test. It is. It doesn't test the user experience from start to finish, but it does keep your test manageable. And if you're doing proper state management, it's just as good.
Awesome. Cacie, thank you so much for all of the great information you have provided. And you have provided a great deal about cy.origin. So I am sure there are some questions from the audience. So I want to jump into Q&A, make sure everyone has time to get their questions answered. For those joining live, we would love to hear your questions about cy.origin. Now, I know there is a ton of stuff in the Cypress ecosystem that we could chat about, but we'd really like to keep the conversation focused on what we're talking about today, cy.origin, and implications for that command in Cypress version 14. If you do have some of those other questions, like a help request for a specific implementation, we have those help channels here in Discord. Or if you're looking for a roadmap update or feature update, you can also put those in community discussion. So with all of that, if you all will please drop your questions in chat. I'm going to give you some time to type those out. And I'm going to do that by starting off with a question of my own, Cacie. So I'm going to deviate just a little bit from cy.origin, and I want to know what you think is the most underrated feature in the Cypress framework. And go.
I would say test replay, but it's not been underrated. Test replay is a fantastic tool. Let me think.
What about command-wise in the framework itself? What do you think is the most underrated or one that's not used enough?
Session, I think, is the most underrated. It's so useful for setting up your sessions for your test and making sure you're not authenticating more often than you need to be. I think tasks are also a little bit underrated. Oh, nice. If you need to perform operations on your server outside of the browser. So when you set up a task in Cypress, that's going to run on in the node context rather than the browser context. And so that lets you do a little bit more than you might be able to otherwise. And I think that can be really useful especially for things like seeding your database and preparing state for your tests.
Awesome. I'm going to jump into chat and see what questions we have. First of all, Sebastian, hello. In cy14, if I have multiple domains and he said multiple domains and I do need to interact and use cy.origin, how can I test in WebKit or iOS?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, WebKit is still experimental in Cypress, and cy.origin doesn't work very well in it yet. That's the state of things, unfortunately.
And I think
we do have Electron and Chromium and things like that, but the cy.origin functionality in WebKit isn't quite there.
Okay. Thanks for that information, Cacie. Let's see. Do we have any other questions in chat? I saw one. come up.
Sorry,
Is it going to work with inject document domain true?
Yes, sorry. Inject document domain basically reverts Cy14 to Cy13 behavior with regard to cy.origin. We were planning on deprecating it's marked as deprecated, so you will get a warning when you use it, starting in Cy14. We're not planning on removing it anytime soon, but it is just a notice that that is going to go away in a future version when we do have better parity and can more safely just remove the inject document domain code entirely. Now, keep in mind, if you are using inject document domain true and you're in Chrome, you may have some issues, especially if Chrome is doing a slow rollout of deprecating the document.domain API. So if you get caught up in that, cy.origin won't work as well as you expect it to. And regular just not using cy.origin in a same site context will maybe not work as well as you expect it to. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Use inject document domain for WebKit, absolutely. Take care with Chrome because Chrome might pull the rug out from under you.
Awesome. And I saw Sebastian in chat, so I'm going to give him just a moment to finish typing out his comment. Cacie, as he does, is there any like parting words here? We're cutting close to time, but anything like that you would say, this is the thing you need to know about cy.origin. In a nutshell, here's 2 sentences. Keep this in the back of your mind. What would those things be for the audience?
The arguments and the function definition need to be serializable.
Nice.
And architect your tests so you use it as infrequently as possible. There are ways to do that.
Okay. I don't see anything else in chat coming through, so I think that we are going to start winding down. So let's go ahead and thank Cacie, everyone. Cacie, as always, you've shared amazing information with us. We really appreciate all of the insights that you've provided. If you are looking for more information on cy.origin, remember those resources that Cacie mentioned. We have the real world app. You can look in our docs. And don't forget Kitchen Sink. We have a ton of examples for all kinds of commands over in Kitchen Sink, so take a peek over there as well. I want to thank everyone who joined us live today and anyone that is catching the replay. Thank you so much for joining in. We look forward to seeing you on our next session, which is going to be on June 10th. And remember, if you are looking to have a specific topic talked about in one of these sessions, go ahead and drop us a suggestion into that community discussion thread. And if you want some bug bash swag of your own exclusive to these episodes, then attend live or drop us one of those suggestions and we might pick you for the next session. All right, folks, that is all we have today. Thanks a lot for the engagement. Thanks for joining us and chatting with us. Cacie, thank you again for everything. And for everyone else, happy testing, folks.